Open our Bibles tonight to the book of Esther, chapter 6. We're going to begin reading with verse 11. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and brought him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaimed before him, Thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Mordecai came again to the king's gate, but Haman hasted to his house, mourning and having his head covered. Haman told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men and Zeresh his wife unto him, If Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shall surely fall before him. And while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains, and hasted to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. We've already seen that on that night the king could not sleep, so one of his staff went to the archives and picked that book and opened it to that chapter that just happened to deal with Mordecai saving the king's life from two assassins. When the king heard what Mordecai had done, he asked, What reward did we give Mordecai for saving my life? Now, we were talking last week, several of us at the conference, and all of us agreed that we're in this conversation, that it was nothing less than God providentially directing, ruling, controlling, that on that night, the servant got that book, opened it to that chapter, and that part of the chapter that dealt with Mordecai saving the king. That was nothing less than the hand of God ruling and reigning and controlling everything. The king had no idea that Haman was the man that Mordecai was the man that got this whole issue started of killing all the Jews. King had no idea. He signed the decree based on Haman's word. There's some people out there that do not obey your rules. King didn't know who they were. And when he heard about Mordecai, he had no clue that Mordecai was the very man that got all of that started. Well, the next morning, the king wants to reward Mordecai. And so I just lost the word. As the normal procedure for the king, he said, I need advice on how best to reward Mordecai. Who's out in the lobby? There's always an advisor. And they looked and said, Haman is out there. Now, Haman's there to hang Mordecai. And the king says, bring him in. Haman comes in. King, I want to hang Mordecai. But before he can say a word, the king says, I want to honor a man in my kingdom. Well, we've already looked at the pride of Haman. He was so proud, so arrogant, and so narcissistic. Look up those three words, three different words, similar meanings, but each one goes a little bit farther. And of all the people, he was the most proud, arrogant, narcissistic man in all of the kingdom. So he runs in wanting to hang Mordecai, and the king says, stop, wait, I need advice. How do I honor someone that I want to honor? And immediately, Haman says, who in the whole wide world is more worthy of honor than me? There is nobody in the entire kingdom that is more deserving and more worthy of honor than me. Now, how would I like to be rewarded? And he comes up with this really extravagant plan. We looked at that. Let the king's royal apparel. Now, this is not the current stuff. This is last year's style. The robe and everything that you used to wear. Now, it's out of style, but it's still the king's garment. Let the king's royal apparel be put on this person, and then get one of your most noble princes to ride on Air Force Two, the king's former horse, ride him down, walk him down through the street, and as he's walking, this is what happens to a person the king wants to honor. And the whole town, the whole palace would look and see, oh, wow, that's the person the king wants to honor. Now, he's imagining himself on that horse. He's imagining himself in the king's royal apparel. He's picturing himself wearing the king's crown. And he's thinking, man, I am in for a ride. Everybody is going to be forced to see me on the king's horse in the king's royal apparel, wearing the royal crown and being honored in front of the whole entire city. He is thinking, I can't wait. Wow, man, this is going to be nice. And the king said, that is a brilliant idea. Thank you. I knew it was, because I had it. The king said, now, I want you to do everything you just said to Mordecai the Jew. And as my most trusted, highest prince, I want you to be the one to lead Mordecai and make sure everybody hears all over the whole palace, this is the man that the king desired to honor. I can only imagine how Haman must have felt. So he's backed himself into a corner. It was his plan. It was his idea. And now he has no choice but to do the king's command to the most hated person on the face of the earth. And so he sends someone, bring Mordecai to the palace. Mordecai put on the king's robe, ride on the king's horse, wear the king's crown, and I will personally lead you through the entire town. He's backed himself into a corner. In verse 11, he did what he had to do. Didn't have a choice at this point. He had to do it. But he only did what he absolutely had to do. I'll do it, but I'll do the bare minimum. I will do what I have to do, but I'm not doing 1 ounce more than what I absolutely have to do. I can imagine how devastated he must have felt. I'm going to be on the king's horse. No, you're going to lead Mordecai. Mordecai. I came here to kill him. I came here to hang him. And now you're telling me I've got to honor him. I can just almost imagine how he must have felt. There's a couple of contrasts here that I want to point out very briefly. Mordecai, I believe, was probably pleased that he finally was getting the thanks he deserved for saving the king's life. He must have had a sense of satisfaction, because after all, we're all human. There must have been a sense of satisfaction to have the man that hated his guts, hated him, walk down the street saying, "This is what happens to the man the king desires to honor." As he rode through town, all of those people that previously had bowed down before Haman and worshiped Haman and questioned Mordecai, "Why don't you bow down?" And when he told them he couldn't because he was a Jew and it was forbidden to bow down and worship any man, they went and told Haman, knowing it would probably get Mordecai in trouble. And now those same people are watching as Haman is leading Mordecai through the town. I think I know how I would feel. All you people that got on my case because I would not bow down, I refused to bow down. God is proving me right. None of them got to ride on the king's horse. None of them got to ride, to wear the king's royal robe and apparel. None of them got to be honored. And so as Mordecai's going, it's like, you see, it really does pay to take a stand. He took a stand on biblical principles, and though it almost cost him his life, now those very people that ran and told Haman to get Mordecai in trouble are now having to watch as Haman leads Mordecai down the street. Then there's Haman. He had to feel totally humiliated. The very man he hated is now being honored by the king, and I am the one being forced to do it. Notice what it says. It says that when it was over with, in verse 12, Mordecai went right back to work. He went back to the king's gate where he worked. Doesn't appear to be any gloating on his part. We don't find any indication that Mordecai went and said, "Did you see me riding on the king's horse? That was me on the king's horse." You don't see it in Mordecai, at least not in the Bible. You don't see Mordecai gloating over the fact that of all people, Haman had to be the one. You don't see Mordecai doing any of that stuff. The trip is over. He goes right back to the king's gate. He goes right back to work. I'll have more maybe, but I'll say this in case I forget later. Humble people seldom gloat in pride. He had been honored. He had been vindicated. But we don't see him gloating and bragging and saying, "Look at me." Haman, on the other hand, hasted to his house, "Get me out of here as quick as possible. I am embarrassed. I am humiliated. I want to get home as quick as I can." And he went home mourning. Oh, I can't believe this happened to me. This is the worst day of my life. He is mourning because he had to honor Mordecai. And then the Bible says that he covered his head. He didn't want anybody to recognize him. Didn't want anybody to see him and say, "You had to lead Mordecai." He covered his head, mourning, straight home to get out of the public eye. Have you ever been thoroughly embarrassed? I have a few times. The last thing I want on earth at that moment is people seeing me and saying, "Oh yeah, you're the one." He is mourning. He covers his head. He hastens to get home because he has been totally humiliated. He gets home and he begins to complain to his wife and his friends how he had been humiliated. I've dealt with a lot of arrogant, narcissistic people over the years. One thing that I've noticed is everything centers around them. I have been humiliated. I have been embarrassed. Oh, woe is me. How terrible. I am being treated. See, even in the presence of total humiliation, he's still mourning because he was humiliated. Solomon wrote in Proverbs 16:18, pride goeth before destruction. I know most of us have been taught pride goeth before a fall. You won't find that in the Bible. It's pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Haman is about to fall, and all he can complain about is how he was humiliated. Now, in verse 13, he gets advice from his wife and his friends. Now, there's some question whether his wife and friends understood and knew that Mordecai was a Jew and that he had taken on the nation of the Jews. It's like, wait a minute, whoa, Mordecai's a Jew? If Mordecai's a Jew, you're going to fall. So there's some question. When he made the original plot and plan, did his family and friends understand that he was going specifically after the Jews? Some say yes, many say no. But they tell him, if you're going after the Jews, you've already begun to fall. You've already begun to fall in verse 13. You will not win against the Jews. You will not win. Now, I'm not going to get into it, but there have been people since the very early days of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, right on down throughout history, people have always tried to annihilate the Jews. And you know how many of them have succeeded? Take a wild guess. How many think exactly? They have tried for centuries to annihilate the Jews, and not one of them has ever succeeded. Oh, but Hitler killed 5-6 million Jews. That was a huge amount of people. But he did not succeed in annihilating the Jews. Some of you remember the war back, started to say a few years ago, but it's probably been longer than that. I can still remember it, so it hasn't been that long ago. And there were some countries that said, we are going to wipe the nation of Israel off of the face of the map. You know what happened? The Jews said, we're not going to come at you frontward. We're going to circle around, come up behind you. And who ended up getting stomped? It wasn't the Jews. Well, what about what's going on today? Today is not the first time people have tried to kill the Jews. But if you read the Bible, you know they're not going to succeed either. At some point, they're going to come down from the north, which is Russia, China, and some of the other major nations. They're going to come down, and when they come down to wipe Israel off of the map, God is going to appear, and God is going to kill them so that the blood flows to the bridle of a horse for thousands of miles. Haman thought he could annihilate the Jews. But guess who wins in the end? But I'm getting ahead of myself. In verse 14, he is completely forgotten his dinner appointment with the king and queen. He completely forgot all about being invited to the queen's house to eat and dine with the king and the queen. He was so embarrassed that all he could think about was his embarrassment. And he completely forgot what the day before had been the source of so much pride. He was so focused on his condition and how humiliated he was that he couldn't think of anything else. And so the king's chamberlains had to come and say, Mordecai, you're late. Get ready. Let's go. You're going to be late to the queen's house. And so he takes off. Now, as I thought about this, and I actually began thinking about this a couple of weeks ago, I'm always trying to stay ahead of where we are. I wondered about us. I'm going to ask some very personal questions. And I'm going to ask you, do not look around at anybody else. Don't look to your spouse. Don't look to the people in front of you. Don't look to the people behind you. I want you to look at yourself and no one else. Most of this is not new, but I want to drill the point home. Anger, bitterness, wrath can become so all-consuming that you can't think of anything else. Now, while you're looking at yourself, nobody else, is there somebody, maybe it's at work, I hope it's not at church, maybe it's in your community, but there is somebody that you become so fixated on their faults and their mistakes and their shortcomings that you cannot see your own. As pastor, I have not always had members that loved me. Can you imagine not loving me? I mean, as smart, intelligent, as personable, as outgoing, as wonderful as I am. Who was it on Shark Tank, Mr. Wonderful? Anyway, some of you that have ever watched Shark Tank. But when I become fixated on them, I forget everything and everybody else. One person can say something negative and I don't even hear the other 99% that are positive. I am fixated on that one person and I can't see, hear, or think of anything else. I don't see my faults, well, because I don't have any. I am I'm so like Haman. I am so full of anger and bitterness that all I can see is that one person that doesn't like me. I don't see everybody else. I don't hear everybody else because I am fixated on them. And when I'm looking at their faults, I don't see mine. Now, for those of you that are wondering, if you think, even jokingly, that I don't have faults, talk to my wife, my kids, talk to anybody that knows me. But when I become focused on someone else's faults, I honestly and truly don't see my own. They humiliated me rather than I allowed myself to become fixated on them. You see the difference? On the one hand, it's what they did to me. On the other hand, it's like, you know what? I am not perfect. I have more faults than I've got time to even begin to cover. The one is focused on what they did that affected me. The other is, I still am more blessed than I deserve. See, the difference is, one, I'm looking at you. The other, I'm looking at me. They embarrassed me rather than maybe I have too high of an opinion of myself. You can't embarrass me if I already feel that I am the chiefest of sinners. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am chief. See, and it happens to all of us at some time or other. We are so focused on what you are doing wrong that I don't see anything that I'm doing wrong. Haman could not see his faults. He could only think of how he had been humiliated and embarrassed, how he had been wronged. It never occurred to him that he might be wrong in killing or trying to kill millions of Jews. That's perfectly okay. That's fine. If I can kill millions of Jews, that's fine. But I cannot tolerate somebody doing me wrong. Everything centered around him. I began thinking of, and I could spend another 45 minutes on some of these things, but Jesus understood this principle. In Luke chapter 6, verse 42, if you want to write it down or look it up, mark it beside your Bible. I underline a lot in my Bible. I write little notes out to the side of my Bible so that when I read it again, I can remember, oh, yes, I remember that verse. Luke 6:42. Either how canst thou say to thy brother, Brother, let me pull out the mote that is in thine eye, when thou thyself beholdest not the beam that is in thine own eye. Thou hypocrite. Thou hypocrite, cast out first the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to pull out the mote that is in thy brother's eye. Oh, we can spot the tiniest flaw in others. I remember several years ago, my brother was pastoring a church. One man in the church decided my brother had to go. And so he began gathering the forces, gathering the people. My brother showed up to church one night. This particular man met him at the door and said, "We've called a business meeting," which was illegal according to their bylaws. "We've had a business meeting and we voted to fire you. You're not even welcome inside the church building." They would not even let him enter into the building. They changed the locks so he could not even get into his study to get his own books and his own things out of the study. The man that led the coup showed up at the conference last week. And when I saw him, it's like, do I want to spit in his face? Do I want to punch him out for what he did to my brother? And I came to the point where, you know what? I may not have ever done that, but I've done some things that were just as bad, just as sinful. And I had to get to the point where I had to forgive that man. You see, what he did was wrong. By any and all definition, what he did was wrong. But I began looking at myself. And I saw not what he did, but I saw all the things that I have done. How many times have I said things, done things that offended people? How many times have I hurt people's feelings? And by the end of the conference, I actually walked up, shook his hand. "How you doing, brother?" We chatted briefly. I could have gone through the entire conference hating that man for what he did. But God had to take my eyes off of him. I had to give up my anger, my displeasure. I had to give up what he did and begin focusing on how many times have I done, maybe not quite to that level. And you know what? After I spoke to him and treated him like a human being, I began to enjoy the conference a whole lot more because I wasn't carrying that anger, that bitterness. Who is it that upsets you? I can't believe she sits on the front pew and acts like she owns the place. The problem isn't her. The problem may be me. How do I know she sits there like she owns the place? Because I made it up in my mind. I imagined that's why you sit on the front seat, is to irritate me. And the more I think about it, the more irritated I become until it becomes all-consuming. And if you've ever asked her why she sits up front, there really is a very good reason. Has nothing to do with irritating me. You see, we focus on the Mordecais of our life. We focus on how Mordecai humiliated me. Mordecai did not humiliate you. You humiliated yourself because of your proud, arrogant, egotistical, narcissistic attitude. Mordecai did not embarrass you. You embarrassed yourself. Once I begin to realize, you know what? God's going to deal with him in his own way. God's going to deal with him in God's own good time. I am not going to allow him to steal my joy. You see where I'm coming from? You understand what I'm trying to get across? Nobody in this building is perfect. Not even you, as much as I love you. But sometime we need to look internally. Why did that anger me? Because I think I deserve better. Wrong answer. Why do I dislike that person? Well, because I don't like their attitude. You don't know what my heart is. You cannot see my heart. Haman is so focused on Mordecai that he couldn't even remember, I have an appointment with the king and queen. And he had to be hastened by the king's chamberlains. One of the things that I've come to realize, and part of this is age, part of it is experience, is nobody, not even my wife, is going to do everything the way I wish they would. If my wife would just listen to me about everything, you ever thought that? If they would just listen to me, maybe you need to listen to them. There are some people that have good ideas besides me. What is it that upsets you? Are you sure it's them and not you? Are you sure? I might say, well, what they did was wrong. And in his case, everything he did at that time was wrong. But I made a decision. Yeah, I made a decision. I am not going to allow what he did 15 years ago steal my joy and my peace and my happiness today. Are you like Mordecai? You get an honor. Thank you. I appreciate it. Now, let me go back to work. Are you like Haman, who is so full of pride that you resent everybody who dare to do something different than you do? Which one are you going to be, Mordecai or Haman?